And we're live.
Hello, and welcome to the Modern Romantic Podcast, where we celebrate romanticism through many creative outlets and passionate people doing some incredible things. Hello, I'm faring nicely. Thank God for allergy medication. Hi, I'm Trey, and I am joined by my forever podcast guest and host, uh, Lady Emily. Jeez. Oh.
I'll be a guest today. That's fine. I too am on allergy medication, so it's a good day.
Oh, Lord. Now that I've made a complete fool of myself, time to take myself to the fair. Uh, Emily, would you like to introduce our guest for today?
Sure. Today I have somebody who is kind of a hero in my eyes. Um, she runs the websites fairfinder.com and historical.net, but she's also the former queen of Renaissance magazine, Julie Guarnaccia.
Kim,
Yay!
thank
Good
you
to have
very
you.
much.
Thank you for
Yeah,
coming
thanks.
on.
So, what can I tell you guys that
Well,
will be interesting?
Everything.
everything. I want to start by saying what a hero you are to me because
Uh,
Renaissance magazine was like the thing that unlocked something for me, and I'll explain. So, like I won't say the year, but years ago, years ago, I was in my early 20s, and I had a friend at work who told me about what a Renaissance festival was. And I was like, what? A place like that exists? She had gotten one of those little hair tie things with like the
yeah,
beads
yeah.
hanging from it. And she had gotten like a flower wreath crown. And she told me about turkey legs and all the things, the joust, all of it. And I was like, this place exists. This was like, I mean, I grew up loving castles. I remember one of my favorite movies for my childhood and for my whole life was Princess Bride. Like
Hmm.
that was my thing, and to know that this whole festival existed for this purpose was I could go live my dream for like a day. I'm gonna go do it, and so I went, and I rented a crappy costume, and I went and I didn't care because I felt beautiful. And one of the things they sold in the gift shop was Renaissance magazine. And it might not have been that year that I noticed that it was sold, but at some point, because I didn't stop going, at some point I noticed Renaissance magazine and I bought it because I thought this is so cool. And so then it wasn't long after that that I saw it in Barnes and Noble. And seeing that in Barnes and Noble during a time when going to the Renaissance Fair was super nerdy, super dorky. You don't bring that up in public often. Make sure you're with the right crowd. So
Right.
to have something become somewhat mainstream or have such a hand in making that more mainstream was incredible to me and incredible for all of us. I don't think you realize what you gifted the world with by having Renaissance magazine. Maybe you do, but I wanted you to know that.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, I mean, occasionally I would get letters from people that would be mind-blowingly, you know, heartfelt, but it wasn't often. So it's always nice to hear. I think the best letter I got was from a mom whose daughter had just passed away from some, cancer that took her, and how Renaissance magazine had helped her through like the last year of her life, and that she always looked forward to the next issue. And I was just like, oh, blown away by something like that. Um, but otherwise, you just kind of live your life, and you're mucking around in the day-to-day struggle of
Yeah.
keeping a magazine afloat. So you don't really spend a lot of time thinking about how this might be impacting your readers' um, lives. So it's really pretty special when I hear stories like that. Um, which I do rarely, but on occasion.
Good.
And that's part of the reason why I decided to get back into it a few years ago, because I just One of the things about the Ren Fair community is, yeah, they're totally nerdy, but they're the most
in a good way.
loving people. They're
Mhm.
so like, they'll embrace you no matter how not creepy, but crazy you are. You can have all sorts of weirdness about you and really be an eccentric person, and you are
Yes.
welcomed with open arms. And there are very few communities like that. You think about like reenactors in general. Reenactors only are very strict. They want you to be historically correct, and if you aren't, they will shun you. And I don't know if that's how the Civil War community works, but I think it's in certain respects, the Scadian, the SCA community, I think, is a little bit like that. Where you have to really get into historically correct dress and make sure that you're reenacting the appropriate time period down to the decade and everything, which is wonderful. Like, what a great experience. But most people, the average person isn't that hardcore about it. But you can go to a Renaissance fair and wear just about anything. And if you want to hang out with the washing well wenches or the fairy community or the Viking encampment, they will welcome you in and sit you down and have you become part of their play, that they're putting on. So it was a real experience in that way, to realize like what a wonderful group of people this community was. The folks that put on the fairs, perform at the fairs, sell their wares. I mean, they're amazing craftspeople that go to these, sell their stuff at Renaissance fairs. Some of them is just absolutely crazy, beautiful work in craftsmanship. So, just to be around that, and then just watching kids have a blast as well, watching the joust. But of course, I'm yelling as much as any kid.
Of course.
Cheering on the night. Or what's so exciting too is I went to, I think, oh gosh, I don't know, it was like maybe the New York or Connecticut Renaissance Fair in the last few years. And I was so excited to see that it was like female jousters. And it was back in the day when I started Renaissance Magazine in the 90s, there was no such thing as a female jouster. They might have a woman do tilting, catching rings at the end of their lance, but that was about it. Women did not joust, and this was like an all women's group that was out there jousting. I don't think it was full contact jousting, but I mean, it looked the part, it looked real. And I was just like, oh, what a great experience for these young girls watching that really, you can now see women literally doing something super dangerous, because people die jousting, not all the time, but it does happen. And these women were putting their lives on the line, to perform. And I was like, that's amazing. So you can bring your daughter now to a Renaissance fair, and you can literally tell her, look, you can be a knight if you want to. You don't have to be the princess anymore. And here, I'm going to show you. We'll go to the joust and watch the women in full armor joust against each other. So
just this morning, I actually was on TikTok, because that's what you do nowadays. But actually, I happened to see this this post early this morning of how people were kind of looking at these guys, and they were just goofing off and being jousting like characters. And this guy was hanging off the side of a horse, and this other guy was like trying to ham it up for the ladies. And then they pan over to the female jouster, who like took off her hood and had that "I am no man" sort of moment. And it cuts back to the people that were filming, and their jaws just dropped because they had the poise, they had the everything about them, and they just went, this is what I want.
Yeah.
So yes, this is now what I want. I want female jousters.
Yeah, it's a different feel, but they were as hardcore as the men, and I think there is absolutely a place for women jousters, and there more women are in reenacting in the battle scenes and that sort of thing as well. So I'm hopeful that in the next decade we'll see more and more women being interested in joining, because I don't think at this point they turn you away. I just think more men tend to be interested in reenacting a battle scene or that sort of thing. So I think over time we're going to see, it be more of a 50-50 situation. But even if it's not, the fact that there's a few women doing it is just wonderful, I think.
And that girls can see that they have a choice.
They have a choice.
Yeah.
Right? They can be a princess. That's fine. But they don't have to anymore. So, yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So when this might be a very hard question to answer, because I think everyone is going to have their own answer for it, but what is one thing at a festival that you look forward to, like every single time?
I love the joust, so I always look forward to going to that at the end of the fair day. But I love seeing people in costume, and when I was running Renaissance magazine, that's a big part of my day. When I would go to a Renaissance fair, I would be carting around a big, huge camera bag with my big Nikon and, a light, what do they call it? Like whatever, light screen or whatever to get the light just right. And I would run around and take photographs of people in costume for the magazine. And then I would usually schedule to take photographs of a popular performing act or performer that we had scheduled an interview with, so that we had original photos of the performer to accompany the article. And so I was always on the looking out for those unusual, fantastic costumes. And then, asking folks if they wouldn't mind me taking photographs of them. And I still do that. What I've been posting recently, as we were just talking on our new YouTube channel, is photos, or actually they're short videos of people in costume at the Renaissance Fair. And I've been pretty amazed at how many hits we're getting with that. So, even though it might be a 6-second shot of, a couple in a crazy costume, it's, I think people love seeing what others, the creative spirit that so many people who aren't going as performers, they're paying, the $30 admission fee just like everybody else, but they've made their costume and it's fantastic. I had a gal who lives out in Arizona who writes for me now, and she said, I've never been to a Renaissance fair. And I'm like, oh my God, you have to go. If you're going to write for me, you have to go. And so we got her a press pass, and she went, I think, opening day. And I told her, take as many photographs or video as you can. And she took this shot of a gal that had dressed up like Wednesday Addams. And her boyfriend partner, was the plague doctor in this amazing plague costume with the beak and everything. And she was holding a carriage with a baby doll that was like just crazy. It wasn't like bloody, but it was black. And her, the the carriage for the doll was all black, and it was just what a fantastic pair. And again, Wednesday Autumns isn't Renaissance,
Right.
But who cares, because it was just so well done. And they were like a huge hit at that fair. So that's the nice thing is, hey, you don't have to wear a Renaissance costume or a medieval costume or a Viking costume or a pirate costume to go to a Renaissance fair. You could wear Star Wars, a Mandalorian costume. It really, anime, it doesn't matter, be yourself, enjoy your day, be the barbarian warrior princess or whatever it is that you want to be, and just have fun. Or just, pull a few things together out of your closet. If you're not a costume person, that's totally fine too. Or like you said, there are lots of places at a fair that you can rent a costume. And that's a great way to just, not worry about it and yet still participate in that costume feel. So you feel more a part of that community, I think, when you're wearing something
Definitely.
other than street clothes.
Yeah, that will change your experience. Going in costume is a completely different experience than not going.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to describe that other than you have to just do it to see. I have my own really ridiculous, over the top, Elizabethan nobility garb, because that's, go big or go home is my motto. So I didn't realize that this would happen when I stepped out in it the first time. And that is, if you depending on what you're wearing, because I could go peasant. I've done that too, and I've done a few other looks, fairy and whatever. But if you go out in a cool costume, the chances of you being stopped for your photo increase 20,000 fold. Yeah. You're not going to get your picture taken if you're in street clothes. And whether or not you want your picture taken, the one thing I noticed that was a really cool side effect of that was little kids see you as part of their experience. And that was amazing to be little kids thought I was the princess or the queen or something. And of course, I'm not going to ruin it for them and tell them no. But that was amazing because of how it made me feel. But also I realized how I was being seen by them. I don't know. It changed it for them too. So yeah, go in costume. Whatever it is, just go.
Yeah. And I knew I'd made it when one day I was walking around and someone came up to me and asked where the bathrooms were. And I was like, okay, they think I'm a performer. That's pretty special. If you're dressed well enough where someone thinks you work there.
Right.
And you have to say, no, the privies.
So which ones have you been to?
Oh, gosh, 20, 30 different ones. Yeah, over the years, I've just been to gobs.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I've been really lucky. I've been to fairs all up and down the East Coast. I've been to some small ones in Iowa. Went to a small one in Iowa one year. California, a bunch of times. So the one fair, there's two fairs that I haven't gotten to yet that I have to at some point on my bucket list, which of course is the Texas Renaissance Festival, which is the largest in the country. It has 650,000 people that attend every year. And Bristol.
You haven't
never
been
to Bristol Renaissance.
Those are two that I've actually been to.
Yeah.
Yeah, Texas is phenomenal, mind-blowing. It's kind of like going to your local neighborhood mall and then going to the Mall of America.
Right. It's just over the top.
They have Grecian gardens, and when I went, they stayed open after dark, and then they shot fireworks off at night. You don't see that, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. And the weirdest one I went to was in Arizona, which I love. Arizona, the nicest fair director I ever met. Well, there's been a bunch, but one of the nicest is Jeffrey Siegel, who runs the Arizona Renaissance Festival. And he just was super supportive of me in the very beginning when I was getting Renaissance Magazine off the ground. And the Renaissance Fair circuit, the fair directors were very reticent to support my efforts in the beginning. It really was the merchants that supported it. Now, later on, when they saw that I had gained momentum and was being sold everywhere, that, they said, okay, now we'll, place ads and get involved with the magazine. But in the beginning, very few Renaissance fairs wanted to have anything to do with me. But Jeffrey was one of the few that, was very personally supportive. And so he had me out one year to go to the Arizona Renaissance Fair, which I did to take photographs, and I did a big photo spread. And it's just the wildest thing to walk around in the middle of a desert at a Renaissance Fair where, they're trying to give you the Robin Hood feel of being in a forest with cactus. That is surreal, but they do a really good job of making it feel like, you're in Britain, but in a desert. And right. The only thing, I remember thinking, wow, I spent the whole day drinking water because you're in a desert, so that's one of the things they tell you, right, is make sure you're always drinking water. So I drank the water the whole day, never once had to visit a privy, because it just evaporates right out of you, and that's not the experience that you have in Massachusetts, as an example, where there's lots of humidity. So Arizona was, I would say, the strangest Renaissance Fair, just because, it's not what you expect.
I was at Arizona too. Yeah.
But it's great. I love the Arizona Fair. Yeah.
But how cool. Seth and I, my boyfriend and I, went to our first Renaissance Festival last year. And I just kind of pitched it hey, there's this thing. I haven't been before. He looked at it and went, they have turkey legs. We're going. And we wound up going, and then we started talking about, oh, well, when we come back next year. And I went, oh, you want to come back? And he goes, yeah, and we're going to dress up, and you're going to make our costumes. And I went, and then we...
Okay. Yeah. I had that same experience with my current boyfriend / partner. And I took him right before COVID. We went to Connecticut Renaissance Fair. So this is my kind of hometown fair. And it's a smaller event. So I knew, it's not going to be overwhelming to him. And it's one of these events that, you can see in 4 hours. So I figured if he was like, oh, this is not my scene, we could scoot fairly quickly. And I gave him for Valentine's Day or something like that, a monk costume off of Amazon, right? Super cheap and cheesy, but
easy.
It works. And so he was good sport and put it on, went to the fair, had a blast. He was pulled into a Viking versus monks tug of war.
Wow.
And somebody, I don't know who it was, but somebody ran around pulling anybody who had a monk costume on and pulled them over to the jousting arena. And then all the guys they could find in Viking costume. And then they set them up on sides. And then they had a huge tug of war with all the monks from Lindisfarne or whatever versus the Vikings. And you can only imagine who won. All these big burly Vikings against all these not so burly guys dressed up as monks. But it was hilarious. And after that, he was like, this is awesome. And so the following year, we went to King Richard's Fair, which is in Massachusetts. And so that's more of a moderately to larger sized fair. And he was like, that's it. I'm buying a costume. And we spent the whole day getting him decked out in a full Rennie costume. And he now has a much better costume than I do. And I was just like flabbergasted. I thought for sure he would be like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'll just tag along. But he was like, oh no, I'm getting a real costume this time, not some cheap thing off of Amazon. So he has the full.
I love it though.
The
And
doublet.
where else are you gonna ever see a tug of war between Vikings and monks?
Right.
Nowhere else.
Yeah. And participate in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
I now have this like small desire to see the monks specifically from Monty Python's and the Holy Grail
Yes.
with like the hoods up, can't see any of their
Right,
faces participating in this specific tug of war.
right. I think they would lose too. These Vikings were just like, I mean, you think of what kind of guy would walk around without a shirt on at a Ren fair? Okay, big guys, like really muscular. And so they were like, real hardcore Vikings. So it was no contest. Everybody knew the Vikings were definitely going to win. But so is history, right? The Vikings always won their battles over the monasteries in Britain.
Archer in our chat says, funny how so many of us got sucked into the Renfest world in this way. The second you show up in a costume, the whole experience
Yeah,
changes.
isn't that right?
Yes.
That's why it's so important to wear something. It doesn't matter what, but or rent something like you did, Emily, in your first encounter. Go rent a costume, and
yeah, it's way cheaper. You can play with it. Go as one character one time and a different character another. Figure out what you want to do and be, and you don't have to dump the money into something more expensive yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Kim, going back to something that you said though, I think what we've been talking about this whole time is that the Renaissance Festival, whichever one you go to, is so inclusive of so many different kinds of people. But just like anywhere you go, participating in some fashion just broadens that experience and just opens its arms a little bit more. Because for me, for a long time, I thought that it was a very kind of closed off place. And having that kind of very welcoming experience was just like instantaneous. Like, yep, we're doing this again. We're coming back. And to hear so many more people talk positively about it now and see countless more festivals popping up, just almost like yearly popping up, is really encouraging, and I think speaks to the greater sense of like family and belonging that that we're really blessed to have.
Yeah, I think the younger generations have really have that spirit within themselves in a way that someone maybe my age in their 50s didn't have in elementary or high school. And so that feeling of excuse me, inclusiveness, that you can kind of be whatever, wear your freak flag, be who you are, be true to yourself. Don't worry what other people think. That kind of supportive energy. At least in the schools that my partner's kids go to, that they seem very much on the ball with that in a way that my generation was like, oh no, if you're not, straight and or into sports or whatever, then you're going to get picked on a lot. So I think the Renaissance Fair has kind of embodied that and have embodied that for decades, which is just lovely. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter, what size you are or what style of anything that you like or don't like. You can be goth, you can be anything, and it's totally great. Everybody is going to appreciate whoever you are. You can wear glitter and fur, it really doesn't matter at a Renaissance fair. And in fact, the more crazy you are, probably the more attention with photographs and all that kind of stuff that you'll get for
Yeah,
sure.
you might get dragged into a tug of war.
Yeah.
Kim,
Yeah. Oh yeah,
sorry.
go ahead, Ray.
One thing that I was going to say, and we were kind of talking about it before the podcast started, and I want to make sure to bring this up. Um, there are many times when we're like pitching guests and we start talking about guests that we would like to have, and Emily starts mention some people that she would like to have on the podcast, and I start mentioning some people we have on the podcast, and then we start booking some of these incredible individuals, and then Emily gets really excited, and then I get really excited, and then the day comes and it's just like ah! And for those listening at home,
Yes.
I'm currently feeling a lot like that Kermit gif where he's just like flailing his arms in the air. He's so excited. Um, because it speaks to a lot of things that make us so incredibly excited and inspire us to be on this podcast. So thanks to Emily, I'm getting introduced to incredible people like you, who have clearly inspired so many other people and welcomed so many other people. And one of the ways that I know that you did that is because of the Renaissance magazine. And so I would just kind of like to ask you what really prompted you to kind of start that, and why, mm, I'm trying to formulate the question that I had because I had it and I lost it. But can you kind of tell us about like the foundation of that,
Yeah.
and what was it like starting up your own magazine?
Well, I at the time had been pulled into. I was working for an ad agency at the time, and it was only a few years out of college, and I was not being challenged creatively at this job. And I had met a guy who was about my age at an art show. So he was an artist, and he had started this small magazine, like literary art magazine, where he could do all the artwork. And he was just handing him out on the street corner, sort of thing, or leaving piles of them at alternative stores around town. And he said, I really could use someone to help me design this. And I said, oh, great. Yeah, sure, I'll help. He says, I don't have any money. I said, that's fine. So because I knew it would give me an outlet to be a lot more creative, because he wasn't going to say, you can't do this or that, in a way that I was not being challenged at my job. And so I started work on that. He then decided to move, like within 6 months of me working with him. And so he moved from Connecticut to Florida. And at that point he said, look, if you want it, it's yours. Go for it. And I said, well, this would be kind of interesting to learn more about how to put a magazine together. And so this was all pre-internet, this was early 90s. So no such thing as internet. So I couldn't do any research as to how do you publish a magazine? There was no digital options available. And so I don't know that I read much about it. I must have pulled some books out of the library or something like that. There was a fledgling internet, more or less, but you couldn't really get any information off of that. But I taught myself how to get it, this small, 4-page folded black and white publication. I built it into a 32-page legit magazine that was being sold in the bookstores. And so that was exciting to me because I was doing this all on the side, in addition to my full-time job. But during that time, I met my now ex-husband, and he said to me, look, when we get married, I support you doing these side projects, but let's see if we can find you a topic that will actually make you money, because, short fiction or fiction and art, it just isn't a sellable topic. It's not a market that's ever going to do really well. And it's a saturated market as well. There are a lot of really good short fiction, magazines out there that were quite mature. And he says, so you need to find something else. And he said, okay, well, I'll think about it. And at that point, when we started thinking about, what do we want to do for a wedding? It was his second wedding. And so he was like, he'd been married before. He said, I don't care what we do. We don't need to do a, church wedding. And I said, I'd been to a Renaissance fair before. We had gone once to, I think, the New York Renaissance Fair. And I had kind of had that same, like, oh my God, experience. And I said, let's have a Renaissance wedding. This would be amazing. And he said, okay. And so I said, this is awesome. And so I went to Barnes and Noble or whatever the bookstores were, that had large magazine racks at the time, and started looking for a magazine that would help me figure out, how do you put on a Renaissance wedding? Books, anything that I could find that would give me tips on, what could I do that had a Renaissance-y medieval feel to it that I could make at home, or hire someone. How do you do this? There was nothing out there. And so we winged it. We made our own banners out of cut felt that we sewed into different, like a crest, and then with puffy gold paint. He was an artist, and so he would draw like these Hogwartian, Hogwarts wasn't a thing back then, but different medieval crest symbols on each one, and we had a bunch of those, and that's what we hung up around the hall. And we actually even we made up a dance, he and I, so that our first dance was a medieval weird dance that he and I just made up on the fly. We hired a bunch of performers from the New York Renaissance Fair. So we went back to the New York Fair to pick up business cards of musicians and performers that we could then have perform at our wedding.
Cool.
So we had a musical group that were Ren Fair performers who played music at the reception, and we hired a juggler
Cool.
to perform for the crowd at the reception. And we just had, it was wonderful. And of course we wore costume and had all our, everybody who was in the wedding wore costumes, and our parents wore costumes and everything else. And so once then we went on honeymoon, and then when we came back, I said, there's nothing out there covering the Ren Fair circuit. I don't get it. This is such a huge community of people, and there are Ren Fairs all over the country. And if I'm putting on a Renaissance themed costume wedding, I bet there are other people. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch over doing this other magazine. I'm going to change it to Renaissance. And so what the good part of it is I already had a relationship with the distributors and the buyers at the bookstores, because it's really hard, at least back in the 90s, it was really hard to get in. They wanted to see a good quality publication before they would accept you to be on a newsstand. And then you had to prove sales. And if your sales weren't good, they would pull you. It was just tough. But because I had already kind of proven myself with this other magazine, even though I wasn't making any money at it, they knew the quality that I was able to put together. And so I was able to, one of the probably very few startup, publishers doing it out of the bedroom in your house, publisher, who actually was able to get distribution on our first issue.
Wow.
Which was pretty cool, but only because I'd done this other publication. Yeah. So that's the birth of Renaissance Magazine. Was I couldn't find a darn thing out there on how to put a freaking costume wedding together.
I love that, though. That's how a lot of success stories come about, though. Like, there was a need, you saw it, you made it happen.
Right. Yeah, and you know, down the road, we ended up doing a wedding issue. It started out every so many issues we would put one out, but then it became yearly. We would put out a wedding issue because the wedding issue was always the hottest seller by far.
I believe that.
Of any issue. And so that was a lot of fun because I was certainly with the first wedding issue, I was the one who wrote some of the articles based on, you know, what I had figured out on my own on the fly on tips and tricks on how to put your own, you know, wedding together, shoestring. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun. And I think, you know, like you said, a great way to start something, which is you're looking for something and you can't find it. And then you realize I can't be the only one who needs this information. Yeah. So.
Like, how cool. And to be such a pioneer for something like that. Again, going to ask you to pick your favorite issue of Renaissance magazine.
Oh, that's so hard. There, you know, I have a lot of probably favorite issue or favorite articles or interviews. Like I did an interview with, oh gosh, can't remember his name now. It was many, you know, in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And he was a lute player. And very, very accomplished guy. And I would see him around at the run fairs, and I don't know if he approached me or I approached him. But anyways, I said, I would really love to do an interview with you. And he was, again, really supportive. He was like, of course, whatever I can do, this is great. And so we ended up putting him on a cover. And then he ended up being asked to perform at a Shakespeare festival. But this was an Oxfordian Shakespeare festival in San Francisco. And because my mom, where I grew up in California, and so I said, oh, that's perfect. I will visit my mom, and I could stay at home, and we'll drive up on a, you know, for the weekend, and I'll go to this. And he had said to me, Kim, you got to come to this Oxfordian Shakespeare event. And I said, oh, this is, yeah, definitely. This sounds amazing. And so he performed at their big dinner. And so, you know, at least I knew somebody there. But what this event was, and this is why I really appreciated the connection so much, was because he brought me into this world that I didn't even know existed until I attended this conference in San Francisco in the 90s, which was the theory of that William Shakespeare was not actually William Shakespeare who wrote the plays, but Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. And so this was a conference where like PhDs were giving their dissertation proposals or papers to a group of people who were into this stuff, where they were doing unique research that was supporting this theory. So, for instance, this one guy, I think, had researched they had found like a diary or something like that they were pretty certain was Shakespeare's. And so he had identified like how many times he used certain words in the diary compared to how often they were used in Shakespeare's poetry and plays.
Okay. And
what's the chance of this being the same person, or something like that. It might have been Edward de Vere's. Actually, it was probably Edward de Vere's diary, not Shakespeare's diary. And so, you know, there was so many similarities between Edward de Vere's writings that they knew was his and Shakespeare's writing, that his proposition was, yeah, it's the same guy. And so there were all this new research that it was being presented at this conference. So that was a really fascinating thing to watch, and to hear all the new research and what people were doing around that topic, which is still very much of a in contention to this day as to whether Shakespeare was really William Shakespeare or Francis Bacon or Edward de Vere.
There's a movie or two about that as well.
Oh yeah. In fact, I think we did an article once about how there was a season when Queen Elizabeth kind of disappeared, and she was supposedly going on progress, meaning that she was going to travel the countryside and meet with her, you know, the people, which is what the royalty were kind of supposed to do in the summer. So to get away from the hot, gross air in London or whatever, they would go on progress. And she kind of like disappeared for like a bunch of months and just hung out at this one house for, you know, a manor house for like 4 months, and no one could figure out like, what is she doing there? She should be going all over the countryside. And there's a big theory that, or, you know, that she was pregnant and had a baby, and that she needed to kind of disappear when she got to a certain size and started showing, so to have her baby. And so she had her baby at the manor house, and that baby ended up being taken in by the De Veres and raised as Edward. So Edward was always given a lot of special treatment by Queen Elizabeth and others, in surprising ways that some people say maybe because Edward was her love child.
Interesting.
With Robert Dudley. You know, I mean, she and Robert Dudley were quite close. Yes. And no doubt probably snuggled a lot.
Snuggled. I like that. I had a little royal snuggle.
Royal snuggling. And she may have had a baby because of the snuggling.
Interesting theory. You know, I never
So
heard that.
Can you imagine that, like, Queen Elizabeth may have had a baby that wrote all the Shakespeare plays, that was Shakespeare?
And there could be lineage then, that there would be children of hers, you know, great grandchildren of hers in existence now. That would be right incredible. Huh.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot pro and con with this argument. So I think I'm not real. I love the romantic part of that. Like, she had her love child and she, you know, raised it from afar and treated this guy really well, and gave him lots of, you know, opportunities and chances to learn about the court. And that's kind of how Shakespeare learned so much about court life. You know, that's the theory, right? That somebody who lived in a village in the middle of nowhere would probably not have all the opportunities to learn about the world and about how kings from different countries worked with one another and the history of all of this stuff. It just wouldn't be part of their world in a way that it was for noblemen at the time, you know, who were seeped in that they just lived in that world. And so the theory is that, well, maybe Shakespeare was a royal, or not necessarily royal, but like was a nobleman of some sort. And Shakespeare, meaning shaky spear or shaky pen, was just a pen name. The other theory, of course, was that Edward de Vere, they're pretty certain, was gay. And so if he was gay, that would go a long way as to why he would want to keep his identity a secret, because he was penning love poems to his lovers and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Like, maybe Edward really was Shakespeare, and maybe Edward was also Queen Elizabeth's, bastard son.
So
It was so cool.
somebody write that screenplay. Actually, Kim, you should write.
Yeah.
Let's write this screenplay together. We'll write this screenplay and then pitch this to Hollywood. I don't know if we have any connections whatsoever to make that happen, but we might. And
hey, 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon,
right,
whatever it is, right? 6 or 7. Somebody, one of us has got to know somebody that might know Kevin or somebody in Hollywood.
I think I figured out once that I'm like 2 steps, which is really close.
How? Okay, we will come back to that in a second because, like, I want to know how, but also with movies being made like Chevalier coming out soon, I would really love to see a story like that. So yes, please.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that our audience understands, I just want to make sure that they understand. And Renaissance Magazine doesn't exist anymore, but you have done this incredible thing, and you've created Fair Finder, which is what we've been talking about, Renaissance fairs and things like that.
Right.
This is a really amazing tool for anyone who wants to learn more or whatever. Tell us about Fair Finder.
So when I stuck with Renaissance Magazine through about 60 issues, which was, I don't know, maybe 8, 9 years, something like that. And then it was passed on to different art director and editor. And at that time, over the years, it then got passed on to other people. And by the time like 2017-18 rolled around, which was when I started really jonesing to get back into the community, I was really missing it. And had a little bit of extra time on my hands where I could dedicate to another side project. I realized like the then current incarnation of Renaissance Magazine really wasn't doing a great job at their fair section, which was kind of a foundational piece always of my original vision for Renaissance Magazine, which was that this was the source for finding Renaissance fairs. So I worked really hard to make sure that the fair listings in the back were as comprehensive and correct as possible. So, because there was nowhere there was no Ren list. There might have been some, handouts here and there, Xeroxed handouts somewhere that someone might have of Ren fairs, but really Renaissance Magazine kind of became that place where you could, find out the Ren fair in your area and know where it was. So they weren't doing a very good job of it. And I thought, I think it's time for an app. And I want to try my hand at an app. And so I reached out to some friends of mine who were developers who could do app work really inexpensively. And I said, I want to do an app, and this is my vision for it. And they said, well, if you're going to do an app, you might as well do a website at the same time because you're building a database. So do them both. And I said, okay. So that's when I built Fair Finder. And the Fair Finder is that piece of Renaissance Magazine, which was like the last 20 pages or so of Renaissance Magazine, which were the fair listings. But because of modern technology, we could now add driving directions and maps and add more information. And so that's when I started Fair Finder. And then a year or two later, I started, I said, well, this is great. We're doing we're doing the fair listings, but I'm still not doing any of the editorial side of things that I really love doing with Renaissance Magazine, interviews and articles. And I said, well, I could make this a part of Fair Finder, but it was going to be easier from a technical standpoint to just start a separate website. So that's when I started Mistorical, which was to give me an outlet for getting back into providing content to the community. So with Mistorical, we publish the best articles from Renaissance Magazine. So you'll see, a few times a year we publish, or more than a few times a year, we publish old articles that I freshen up and put in new imagery and everything else. So even if you might have read that article 20 years ago, it's still going to be fresh and new. And then we talk about some of the most recent interesting archaeological finds that have been discovered, or something new and unusual in the history. From basically same thing with Renaissance. It was always from about 650 to 1650 is how I kind of rounded it out. And so I'm constantly looking for, the latest and greatest new something that's been, that might be of interest to people in the Ren Fair community. So like, for instance, last month we published an article about medieval times dinner theater and how they recently unionized. At least a few of their dinner theaters have unionized. So we covered that in a few months ago, like September-ish, when they started unionizing. And now their medieval times in Buena Park, California is on strike. And so I figured, well, we need to talk about that. So there's an article on how the jousters and the queen are now striking at the dinner theater for better wages and better safety conditions for them and their horses. So, topical newsy items. In addition to historical pieces. And now I'm also starting to do a little bit more on video. I want to bring some more video into that world as well. So we'll see, hopefully over the next year or two, more listicles, they call it. So like articles that have lists. And helping people, get ready for Ren Fair and what do you need to do, the type of stuff you need to bring with you if you're a novice Rennie. Fair Speak. I have an article on Fair Speak that's scheduled in a few weeks. So, it just gives you some tips on, how do you address, and then I think that we have one already posted about, how do you address the queen versus a nobleman versus a merchant versus a wench. So the forms of address at a Ren Fair, so that if you're in costume or not, but you want to feel more a part of that community, you'll know what to say and to whom. Your little cheat sheet. Not to say that, you can go to a Ren Fair and have a blast without knowing any of this stuff. It just is a little bit of it adds a little bit more spice.
It helps at festivals like Bristol or Texas, where they're a larger festival, and the people who work there have, and some that don't, but the people that work there specifically have been trained to recognize those stations. So when you go there and address them properly, they interact with you differently. But also, like, depending on how you dress, that also affects your station as well, and how they will address you.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things that I didn't realize until I started getting involved was that if you have a really amazing costume and you know the modes of address and you love going to fair, you don't need to be a performer to perform at fair. So what they will do is they will pay your way, and they will give you sometimes a stipend for food, as long as you come certain number of weekends out in the season. So they want
This I didn't
people
know.
they want people in costume to be there and to add ambiance.
Yeah.
And the way they do that, because they can't afford to hire everybody that they want to be a performer. So they will ask certain people, and it may be the sort of thing that you just call the festival director and say, what do I need to do? Here's a photo of my costume. I want to, you know, I commit to coming every weekend for the run of fair. You know, will you give me, you know, free access? But they will allow you in for free.
This is a fabulous tip.
Food. As long as you walk around the fair and act like you live there.
Yeah. Like,
and
this
so
is
if
a festival
you're really into it and you're willing to go every weekend, that's the way to do it. Man.
I wish I had known this like 20 years ago.
We interviewed a gal who was she dressed up as a visiting queen from another country, and so I took a photograph of her and she was on a cover, and I said, so you're a performer? And she's like, no, I just come and they let me in for free because you know, they know that that I present myself like a queen. And she had a, you know, royal costume, and they were like, oh yeah, we need you here to look as if you're part of the court. So she was a visiting queen. And she came every weekend. Yeah.
The wheels are turning.
Yeah.
To Josh listening in our moderator chat, please get ready. I feel like a costume is coming.
Right.
That's fabulous to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and I've also been thinking it would be fun. I haven't done this yet, but to review inexpensive costumes off Amazon, so that because there's a lot of crappy ones out there, but there are some good ones. And then how do you know what size? You know, because they come from China, and so the sizes are like totally different from American sizes. So to have someone who says, these are good costumes, they're not going to fall apart on you, and you need to, you know, if you're a size large, you want to get a 2XL or something like that, right? To do something like that and start reviewing product on Amazon so that people who want to try it out inexpensively, you know, and just get a simple $30, $40 costume off Amazon, they know which one to get.
I would love to help with this in any capacity.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be fun?
I mean,
and then you get to like order everything and try it all on and then go, yeah, that's terrible. That's not going on the Fairfinder AAA rating list.
I offer to be the male model.
All right.
Offer.
But yeah, that's the key, is that we need people willing to try them on and have a photograph of some sort to show that, yeah, the costume looks decent, and maybe even say a few words like, yeah, I love it, or it doesn't really fit here. It should.
Okay. We will talk about this later.
And like along that same vein, maybe we could do an episode like as we start getting closer to some of the larger festivals about people who are wanting to make their own costume, and talk about like patterns that might be good, or like fabrics to consider, and like considerations when you're making that, kind of like a tips from people who sew.
Yeah, I used to do costuming for some of the royal court at the Minnesota Renaissance Festival, and in general, I was a costume designer.
Yeah, so you could talk about like the history of the ruff, and then how you could put a ruff together inexpensively and simply.
Oh yeah,
because they look very complex, but they really aren't.
No,
you kind of have to know how to fold or whatever and how to make the lace
stiff.
Yeah, stiff.
Yeah.
Or you could talk about the full 9 yards, where that term comes from, right? From the Scottish kilt. Right.
That's funny because I just got done telling James about that the other day. Because he was like, I want a great kilt. What does this mean?
It was like, well, I guess we can get you the full 9 yards.
Right.
But that's where the term comes from, is that, a full, is it a great kilt? What they would call a great kilt, where you'd wrap it around your midsection and then also use it as a cape and also a shawl. And also, if you were sleeping outside at night, a blanket. You had to have a full 9 yards of fabric. And there was, a technique for folding it up in the back, so that that's where kind of the folded kilt came up, so that it would kind of flow over your belt appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
But then you needed enough that it would pull all the way over, so that you could use it to stay warm, keep the wet out. If it was raining, it was like an all-purpose huge piece of cloth. But yeah, it was 9 yards long, and that's where that term comes from. So there's a lot of really cool history that happened, like terms and weird parts that would be fascinating from a costuming perspective.
Sure.
To talk about that. I think it would be fascinating, like the French hood. How did that come about?
Right.
And how did,
why is it called a farthingale?
And
Right.
brought it from France and made it a thing. And, one of the things I'm really curious about, however, is like, there's this new fashion at the Renaissance Fair. It's this like little top hat, which is really cool for women, but no one wears French hoods anymore. No one wears anything really historical.
Yeah, it's like a fascinator. And then, I noticed that too. In fact, it's interesting because there were a couple, I can't remember where, but I remember reading not too long ago that a French hood was considered matronly. And I wonder if that's why people, like, it's not as cute.
Okay.
People want to be cute.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm always looking for like something different and cool to wear for headgear.
Yeah.
And there's like 2 styles available that you can purchase at a Renaissance Fair for headgear, which is very disappointing. And on Amazon, there's like nothing. There's like a hairnet.
Right. Yeah.
And that's it.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So, anyone that can talk about French hoods, or, how do you get a circlet and then wrap the fabric around your here and then it flows out. That's more of I think a medieval style.
Yeah, like
and it looks kind of nun-like, but it was very popular for a season or 10.
We even saw that in Braveheart, I think.
Yeah. So you'll see them in movies on occasion, but you never see that at a Renaissance Fair anymore. And I'd love to figure that one out. I haven't found anyone yet where I could get a good circlet. I think I'm going to have like a blacksmith make me one that fits my head or something.
I'm trying to think if we know anybody, but I don't know if I do know anybody who makes a circlet other than Amber Rose, but she does like the real ornate ones.
Right,
and I don't know if that's kind of what you're looking for. You wouldn't want to cover it with fabric.
Right. And that's kind of the idea, is that it would hold the fabric in place. So you would see maybe a little bit of it, but
yeah. One day, if anybody knows a circlet maker, please email us. And if anybody knows a hat maker, we want to interview them too.
There you go.
Right.
Well, I mean, I have a recommendation, because we did talk to them once upon a time. We talked to John Burroughs back in October, and he was
that's right.
And a blacksmith,
Burroughs Forge.
And I mean,
I was
trying might be able to call it a favor.
I was trying to look through my business cards here because I bought a hat. This
Burroughs Forge.
Yeah, Burroughs Forge. Yeah. He does blacksmith work. We interviewed him many episodes ago, but he's phenomenal, and I bet he would do a custom circlet for you. I can't find the card I was looking for. There's a vendor at the Minnesota Renaissance Festival, and Swan is in the name, I think. And she makes hats and has an Etsy shop. And she has some really cool ones. Not period accurate. Some of them are. Most of them aren't. But boy, are they cool looking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm just one of those crazy ones I'm like, okay, well, I see the same one over and over again. I want something different. And at this point, different just would be a little more historic.
Yeah.
Would be pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that if you don't see it, and this is now a pattern with you. You probably already know this. If I don't see it, I must make it. I must make it exist and be in this world. I'm the same way.
How dare it not exist?
I can totally relate to that though, because that's how like all of the photography I do is like, oh, the dress that I want in the picture in my head. The only way to make that happen is if I make the dress. So I make the dress, and yes, that is same with Trey, right? Trey, the hoodie you want doesn't exist.
So you got to create it.
So you got to make it. He's wearing right now, one that he made.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. If you see it and you want it to come and be a real thing, invest a little bit of time into it, because I swear to you, it's not going to take as much time as you think it will. And the more that you do it, the faster it gets. So the complex costume that you want to make in your head, give it space in reality and it will become real.
Well, I'm a believer in manifestation. You know, I know a lot of people don't believe in that, but I get weird things that happen to me, you know. So I sometimes think all I have to do is say in my head, boy, I really want a circlet. And then somehow it's going to come to me. So like the other day, Walt, my partner, lost his glasses that he wears, you know, all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And he took a day off from work because he was too nervous to drive work without his glasses. And we spent the whole day looking for those darn glasses. We still, to this day, could not find them.
Wow.
But I was like, okay, I'm going to pull out I should use a pendulum on a map of our house to see if I can figure out in what room the glasses may be. And I sat there and went, I used to years ago have a pendulum and I don't anymore. And this really sucks. And I really wish I had that pendulum. And so I kind of put something together with a necklace and, you know, we still didn't find the glasses, but you know, I had this thought like, God, I really wish I had that pendulum. And then I had a birthday last week.
Oh, happy birthday.
And my sister, oh, thank you. My sister's one gift to me was a pendulum.
Wow.
And I just thought, wow, that was just a few weeks of me putting it out to the universe. Like, gosh, I really wish I had a pendulum. Okay. And then, you know, you go about your business and there it was, boom. And I'm like, what a weird gift to give someone. I mean, she knows I'm kind of into stuff like this. But, you know, it just was very random thing.
Cool,
but it was exactly, you know, so I kind of feel like that stuff happens often. You know, if you don't have a lot of attachment to the wish that you put out, where you don't desperately need it, but you just kind of want it. And then you let it go, that sometimes they find their way to you. It may take a few weeks or months, but yeah. So I'll put it out to the universe that I would love some sort of circlet.
Some sort of circlet. That's not without the realm of, that's not without the realm. That's not outside the realm of possibilities. So I think it's very possible for you to get your circlet.
Yeah.
And in this same vein, I think, Trey, you know, we've been doing this whole like, please sponsor us, we love you. We actually have an email for the show called, that's please sponsor us, we love you at themodrom.com. And unfortunately, we don't have to check that email often because not nobody, but just about nobody emails us there. But it was like a joke. We're like, please sponsor us, we love you. And one day, But I thought, maybe our approach is wrong, Trey. Maybe we just need to be like, we wish for Spotify to give us an exclusive deal.
No,
Yeah, don't limit yourself, guys.
No limits.
Go for the gold.
we want Audible. We want Amazon. We want Apple. We want
Google.
we want Jason Momoa to give us an exclusive deal.
We want ABC, NBC.
Why not?
We want an HBO special.
We want an HBO special.
Fantastic. So what would it feel like for you guys to have Jason Momoa on? Like, would you do that happy dance, Trey?
I think we both stopped. I think we both stopped breathing there for a second.
Yeah. Basically.
Because I thought about that. We every now and then, and this happened recently. I don't know if I can't talk about much of this, but very recently we did have someone that we had been wanting to have on the show. Somebody who was a well-known person
on your wish list.
Yes,
and not necessarily. Yeah, it was on our wish list. I'll just say that. I have to be vague, and this is now actually coming to pass, that this person that we wanted is going to be on the show.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I remember when I got the news, thank you to Sandra, our producer, she texted me and was like, they said yes. And I didn't know which person she meant, but I was sitting at the table.
You were like, Jason Momoa? Oh,
you're right. Yeah. You know what? We didn't ask Jason Momoa, but I think we should, because if you don't ask, they won't. Exactly. They have nothing to say yes to.
What's the worst that can happen?
What's the worst? I know. What's the worst thing that could happen, Trey? Would he show up at your door and be like, and then you would literally pass away?
Oh my God. But yeah, I think, why not? You should go for the gold. And I mean, what is amazing is that probably one person out of a certain number will say yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll be like, oh, this is fantastic. And that's kind of, we'll get the ball rolling. And then once that one famous person says yes, then more will come.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe it starts with me.
I think so. I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously. I think we're on a good roll, and we're kind of happy with the direction we're going. At least I am.
No.
Well, I wouldn't mind being invited back on when you guys have Jason.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, obviously you were part of making that happen.
We should talk about Aquaman and oh, well, he's played a Viking or something, some barbarian. Yeah. So we can ask him about medieval Renaissance-y, Viking-y history.
Maybe he's been to a Renaissance festival.
Yeah, why not?
Maybe he's been on Fairfinder to find a Renaissance festival. Would you even know?
Only if he subscribed. And then if he didn't use his real email or name, then I wouldn't know. Yeah.
Maybe he has a separate email for that that's like bobthebuilder@gmail.com
right.
or something. So, Jason, if you're out there listening, you need to go subscribe to fairfinder.com with an email that is recognizable to Kim, so that she knows it's really you. And actually, everybody out there listening needs to go subscribe to fairfinder.com and tell Kim who you are.
Yeah, and it's all free, so there's no downside, except that you get a email in your email box once a month.
Right, and it's wonderful.
With cool article ideas. Article.
Yeah, it's not junk mail. It's absolutely worth subscribing to. And then you get the historical. Is that a separate email? I forget.
The historical is the monthly newsletter, and it includes Fairfinder chart data on it.
And you were telling us one story. You started to tell us one story before we started, and it had to do with. It kind of ties in a little bit with your circlet, and that is. And maybe not. I don't know that you wished for a crop circle, but tell us the story.
Oh, yeah. So I was living up in New Hampshire at the time, and I was publishing. I was still working on Renaissance, but I'd started a new magazine called Mysteries Magazine.
Okay.
And this magazine was about the paranormal, supernatural, science mysteries, historical mysteries. So it was, it wasn't just like ghosts, but we did cover a little bit about that. And I had been invited out to a crop circle convention in Arizona. And I thought, this is so bizarre.
A convention for crop circles.
And I thought, this is great. I'll get, content for an issue, and I'll do a crop circle issue. And so we'll make that kind of the theme of the issue, and then I'll get a lot of information at this convention. And the convention was, again, kind of like that Shakespearean festival or convention, where it was like researchers giving talks about the latest research on crop circles. And there were some people there, like the only crop circle researchers in the US were talking at this convention. And they talked about, these were PhDs from universities. And they also talked about like how difficult it was to study crop circle formation in the US because all their colleagues would make fun of them because it's a crop circle. And so they were often sidelined, as most are as an alternative person and not a real scientist. But one of the things that came up in this convention was how you could authenticate a real crop circle versus one that's man-made. And there was a series of elements that had to be in place when a crop circle is formed for them to consider that it's a real crop circle and definitely not a man-made crop circle. And this is based on years of research that they had done. And also the weird thing is, of course, in England, in Britain, the crop circles have these fantastic designs, and there's all this hidden meaning in the designs, and mathematical equations are worked out in these designs. In the US, it's just a circle. We get the dumbed down version in the United States, but they still happen regularly. They still form regularly. And UFOs are almost always seen in the skies the night that the crop circle is formed. So the elements that I recall about the crop circle formation is UFOs are seen that night nearby. At the time anyways, these guys did not understand what the relationship between UFOs and crop circles were, because no one has ever seen a UFO make a crop circle. But they seem to be attracted to the energy or something so that they are nearby when they're formed. But who knows, right? We just don't know what that relationship is. Maybe they are creating them. There needed to be a power source nearby. So somehow they drain the crop circles. If you have a big field, the crop circle will always form near the power transformer on a pole.
Oh.
Like not on just regular poles, but the transformer needs to be near, they'll form right next to the transformer pole.
Interesting.
So they draw power maybe from that pole or something for the formation. Another one is that the stems of the plant, whatever crop or plant it's formed in, are bent but not broken. And if you step on plants in the way that you would have to form it with, let's say, a plank, and you're walking to make the circle, stepping on a plank, it would break the stems, at least some of them. And then there was a lot of science around what happened to the stem in terms of the water molecules. And so the water molecules literally get completely zapped out of the plant, like just gone. which is fascinating. So it's like the water evaporates out of the plant, and then the plant just kind of folds in on itself, but doesn't break, bends, not break. And so if you were able to analyze a piece of the stem, that would be additional information that could verify a real crop circle versus a man-made. Another one is that if it happens in a field, like a farmer's field or somebody, the first person upon the field or whatever, that there's often a correlation with a special date and the date that it's formed. They don't understand why or how this is, but somehow there's, it's more than just a random date. They pick a special date for this formation. And there was other elements to it, but those were kind of some of the big ones. And so I went to this convention, came back, and I was within days of finalizing the issue and sending it to press. And I had gotten up the morning of my 10th anniversary, wedding anniversary, and went to walk the dogs up in the hills. And where my house was in New Hampshire, it was just, mountains in the background, fields and mountains, nothing, like no people, no houses, nothing. And walked into this back small field of weeds, literally. And there was a depressed circle in that field of weeds. And I thought, okay, I just came back from this convention. Like, what's the chance of this happening? And I said, okay, well, I'll take photos and send it to some of the people that I had, heard their talk and had gotten their names. And so I sent a bunch of photos out and told them, hey, it's right near a transformer. Sure enough, there was a bunch of UFOs that had been seen that night right in our area, that I found out later. And the stems, I took photos, real close-up photos of the stems that were bent, not broken, and sent them off. And then it snowed. And then from that point on, I couldn't get up there because, it's New Hampshire in the winter. Yeah. And so it stayed covered for, I don't know, 4 months, 5 months, something like that. Now, in the meantime, they all got back to me and said, yeah, we think this is probably real. This looks legit. And so I then contacted the local newspaper, in Keene, New Hampshire, which is the closest big town, and said, hey, would you guys be interested in this story? Crop circle formed in my backyard. And they were like, well, that's weird. So sure. And so they came out and wrote up a big article about the crop circle in my backyard. And by this time, now the snow has started to melt. And a bunch of people, locals, had seen the article. And they called me up and they said, hey, this looks really cool. We're kind of these, into New Age stuff. Can we come up and see it? And I said, yeah, of course. Yeah, come on up. And so 3 or 4 people came by and they walked up to the circle, and they stopped. This was kind of in a group. And they were like, okay, no, we're not going into this circle. And I said, why not? Like, I've been in and out of it all the time. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, it's been there a while now, right?
And it's 6 months old now, or 4 months old. And they were like, oh my God, the energy coming off of this is crazy. You can't feel this? And I was like, what are you talking about? And so they literally would not, they stepped up to it, but they would not go in it. And I thought, well, that's weird, but okay. And so they then took off. And apparently, one of them got so zapped with loss of energy on the way home, he had to pull over to the side of the road and nap.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, that's crazy. So they were, in their experience, really feeling a huge amount of theoretically electromagnetic energy still coming off of this field. And then my next door neighbor, who they were farmers, and they were in their 70s, and so they read the article and they were like, "Oh, well, we want to come up too." And I said, "Yeah, come on up." And so the husband and wife came up, and the wife, same thing. She wouldn't go into the circle, and I was like, "Why?" And she says, "Well, I'm American Indian, and I'm telling you, this is the energy coming off of this thing is so strong. There's just no way that I'm going near it." And I'm like, "Wow, this is crazy." So she went back to the house. Apparently, she ended up sleeping that night for like 14 hours straight. And she's like, "I never sleep," so it zapped her energy too. But Bob, her husband, now at this point, we're chatting in the driveway, and now it's getting to be late at night. And now it's like probably 9 to 10 at night, 8, 9, 10, and it's still spring. So, it got dark early. And so we're still talking about, the crazy crop circle and is it real or not real? And I look in the sky and I go, that's a weird light that is flying right by our house, super low to the ground, not your typical lights of, like a helicopter or anything like that, because, you tend to have yellow, white and red, or blue and red, or something like that. And this was like just a kind of a golden light and completely silent. And it was high enough up, and it was at nighttime, so you couldn't see the craft itself, but it was low enough that it felt like it was like far too low for a craft should be flying in this area. And I looked at Bob and I said, "Have you ever seen this kind of craft fly by before?" And he was like, "No, I've never seen this." And I said, "I think we're watching a UFO." He's like, "No." He's like, this is old time New England farmer. And I'm like, "Bob, I think we're looking at a UFO." And he's like, I said, "Do you know what that is?" And he's like, "I have no idea." And I'm like, "Oh, we're looking at a UFO here." And so he, it passes by and goes over the hill. And so he heads back home. And then a second one flies by. Same thing. And I was like, "Oh man, how lucky am I to see," who knows what it is, but completely silent, really low to the ground, slow, weird lights,
Wow.
And so I was like, "Wow, this is the coolest thing ever." And then like a few weeks later, there was a guy down the road that would plow our driveway. And he was like 82 at the time. And he was this spry old guy named Herb. And I'm sitting watching TV one night, and I hear this bang, 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 bang on the door. And I'm like, "What the hell?" In the middle of New Hampshire, who's banging on the door at like 11 at night? And so I go to the door, and there's little Herb, this 80-plus-year-old gentleman. I'm like, "Herb, what are you doing here?" And he says, "You're that crop circle lady, right?"
Oh, no. Now you have a name.
And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I just saw a UFO in my backyard." And I'm like, "What?" He says, "Yeah, you got to come." And I said, "Well, what in the world were you doing in your backyard at 11 at night?" He says, "I was peeing." And I was like, "Oh my God." It's so New Hampshire.
There's some honesty for you.
He's like, "I had to go." So instead of going in his house, for whatever reason, he went outside.
Those poor aliens had to see him peeing.
And he was beside himself. And of course, by the time we ran to the front of the house, we couldn't see anything. But he was just like, I've lived 80 plus, 85 years or whatever he was, in this area. I've never seen anything like it. I swear to God, it was like a UFO. And I was like, okay, if two of my neighbors saw UFOs, one with me and one, a few days later or a week later, just completely random, there's something going on here that's super cool. So that's just a little piece of the my crop circle story.
Wow.
But yeah, so that was just a wonderful time.
I have so many questions, and I don't
I
believe
know,
they're
right?
answerable. Like, I don't expect you to have answers. You know,
Yeah, well, I could go on for another half hour. That would probably.
we're going to have you back on the show, I think. I've always
Yeah.
been skeptical of UFOs because I've not seen much myself. Like, yeah, there's lights in the sky, but I've never seen anything that I would be like, that's completely unidentifiable.
Yeah,
But my dad
me neither.
has, and he still does often in rural Illinois. Like, he lives out in the middle of nowhere, and he calls me so much going, yep, another UFO tonight. We heard noises this time, and that he's describing them, and I'm like, why are you telling
so
me?
cool.
Go tell someone who can maybe run out there with recording equipment, or like my dad, he's like in his 70s, so he's not good with his phone. But I'm like, record this. You have to start recording this, Dad. And he's like, I don't even know how, you know. And I'm like, this is why we haven't captured any good footage, is because people like my dad are out there.
Or Herb, the 85.
Yeah, or Herb, who gets a good look, but that's it.
Oh yeah.
God.
But yeah, you know, they say there tends to be a heightened number of UFOs sightings around crop circles. So this was just kind of another little tiny piece of the puzzle.
Did you
kind of
feel
popped into
anything
place.
though? Like you said, everybody felt energy.
I did.
You did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So although I didn't feel anything, and I was walking in and out of that darn crop circle right and left, what ended up happening to me was I started getting a buzzing feeling in my chest. And it would start at like 5 p.m. and then last until I would go to sleep. And then in the morning, it wouldn't be there. And then it would start again the next day. And I was like, what the heck? It was like a cat purring on your chest. That's what it felt like.
Pleasant,
it was just
though.
buzzing purr feel, right? And I was like, oh my God, do I need to go to a hospital?
Yeah, right. That's what I was thinking.
Like, am I having heart palpitation? Like, what is going on? And so I ended up contacting a psychic that I think I met at the crop circle convention. And I said to her, like, I called her up and I said, hey, I'd love a reading. And then at the end of that, I said, oh, and by the way, a crop circle formed in my backyard. And I would love some insight on that. Like, why did this happen? You know? And she said, well, what she got from it was that when you start dipping into the paranormal to a certain degree, things will start happening to you. And I think this is fairly common if you watch, you know, documentaries about people that are exploring weird paranormal anomalies, that weird stuff starts happening to you. Like you feel like you're being followed. It's kind of like a Mothman thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. That they want you to know that they know that you're dipping into the paranormal.
Like, we know that you know that we know that you know.
Yeah. And that somehow they felt, meaning maybe the UFO aliens or something like that, felt like if they just landed on my yard and came out and shook my hand, that I'd have a heart attack and just pass out and die, because it would just be too much, right? It would just be so overwhelming, that this was their way of kind of easing in and say, we see you, we know what you're doing with your magazine or whatever, without freaking me out completely. And I said, okay, well, that makes sense. But tell me about this buzzing, you know, this purr in my chest. Like, what the heck is going on there? And she said, oh, well, that's your chakra. Your heart chakra is opening up. And I said, what? Because at that point, I didn't know much about chakras. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the stuff that's out there in the bookstores and stuff like that aren't really super helpful about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think they're well meant, but not very useful. Because after that, I did do a lot of research on this and really didn't find much that explained it in the way that she was able to, that resonated with me. And she said, well, when going in and out of the crop circle, there's a huge amount of Um, sorry about that.
That's okay. You have a friend.
Yeah. Electromagnetic energy.
Okay.
And electromagnetic energy affects people differently. Sometimes it heals you, etc. And sometimes it'll make you sick, make you just really tired, whatever. But for me, it blew open my chakra in my heart area. And she described it like a water hose being turned on in the springtime, and all this gunk is coming out and it's sputtering as it's coming out. You know, that feeling of like, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
blah. And she says, so that's what's happening, is you have all this built up gunk from the past 30, 40 years of your life, of, you know, trauma and stuff like that, that it's just kind of blowing that open. And when all of that stuff is out, then you'll be fine. And she says, sometimes when a heart chakra opens, you feel nothing. And then sometimes you might have this weird vibration in your chest for a year. You know, it just totally depends on who you are, what kind of traumas you've had in your life. And she said, so don't, you know, if you think you're sick, you know, go to a hospital. But, you know, this is what I'm picking up, that you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And, oh, by the way, here's a book that I want you to read. It's a medical doctor who started having weird experiences, and he describes this exact same phenomenon happening to him. And sure enough, weirdly enough, it's this tiny little book by Dr. Joy, I think it is. And I think it was written in like maybe the 80s. So it was an older book. But he talks about how when his heart chakra opened and what it felt like. And it was the exact same thing. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And he said, you know, heart chakras tend to open when you when you experience a certain level of forgiveness for someone who has really harmed you. And I realized at that point that the reason why I'd gone to the crop circle convention was because my dad was living in Arizona at the time, and he'd called me up and said, hey, come to the crop circle convention. I'll come with you. And my dad and I had this really rocky relationship. And it was the first time in my adult life where he actually called me up and said, come do something with me. And I was like so proud of him that he had advanced in our relationship so much that he was inviting me, you know, to come to this crop circle convention. And then, you know, we were able to put kind of a lot of issues to bed, I think, during that weekend. And I thought, oh, that's why all of this happened, was because somehow I was able to forgive him in a way that was significant. And so it was all around this crop circle, right? So he invites me to this convention. The convention helps me put this issue together. The crop circle forms. I know the people to authenticate it, you know, and it all comes full circle because now I have this heart chakra healing going on. Although it was really uncomfortable and scary at the time, because I was at that moment, I had this epiphany. Everything stopped. All that buzzing stopped. And I've never had it since.
You know, I was going to ask when it stopped, but wow.
Yeah. As soon as I had that like aha moment. And I was reading this book, this Dr. Joy book, in a restaurant in downtown Keene at the time. And I was like sobbing when I was reading it, because I was just like, you know, this epiphany of, oh, no wonder why all of this happened. And like just the cool connection between everything, you know, about how everything was connected. And everything had to happen in this way in order for this healing to take place. And so it was just this like incredible moment. You know, it was like the best epiphany I've ever had in my entire life, where it just like click, click, click. Okay, now I get it. And so I was completely affected
Yeah.
by that crop circle, but I couldn't feel any of it when I was in there. But it affected me by going,
Yeah. I
So
love this because it is such a happy ending for you. I mean, and I can't say ending really because that's inaccurate, but the culmination of this part of your story is happy. And that is what I love to hear.
and I kind of wish that more people had this type of experience because I've never been in a crop circle. I've never seen one.
who
I've made
does?
one
Yeah.
once.
Emily,
I did. I mowed a crop circle right in the front yard of that house in South Carolina because it was such a big, open, empty front yard. I probably have pictures somewhere.
okay, number one, I did not know that. Number two, you're contributing to the it's a crop circle. No, it's not.
I actually kind of wanted people to wonder if it was real.
Yeah.
Emily.
I did.
But in your case, the weeds were broken and not.
Oh yeah, I mowed the grass right off. And I did it on a dare from my sister, Sarah, who was like, I dare you to mow a crop circle. I just bought this house, and it was like my first house, and I bought it all by myself, and I was so excited. And she's like, I dare you to mow a crop circle in the front yard. And I was like, deal.
Oh my God, I so would have taken that deal too.
So two things. One, the only weird thing that I have ever experienced in my entire life is, to this day, I can't explain it, but I swear that I saw a meteorite like start crashing towards the earth, and it blew up in the atmosphere right over my hometown.
You might have.
So I don't know what it was. It was huge because if I could see it from here, and it was like from my peripheral was like maybe an inch and a half wide, from whatever altitude it was at. Yeah, it was really stinking big. The other thing is,
Did you think it was a meteor? And were you petrified?
No, I wasn't petrified. I just kind of looked at it and went, that's odd. And then I told my mom about it, and she's like, it's probably nothing. I'm like, how dare you? First of all,
I would think it was like a bomb, and I would just be like,
Yeah.
totally free.
That could be scary. Right.
good Lord. God, and what was the other thing I was going to say? Jeez, I got so caught up in the emotional, like, the retelling of that story that
You said there
kinda
was
lost it.
only one or two things that were strange that happened to you. You held up two fingers.
I did hold up two fingers, and now I can't remember what the second thing was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's fine. Hey, we got the story out there.
Well,
Hashtag
now we know the secrets that are going on about everybody here that's seen UFOs and made fake crop circles.
Hashtag stop fake crop circles.
I'm going to add that to this episode.
Okay, not a weird thing, but the second thing that I would like to say, if that we happen to be broadcasting to any UFOs out there,
Oh, yeah.
if you would like to make yourself, hi, we love
Yeah,
you.
we're
Please-
UFO friendly.
We are UFO friendly. Please sponsor us. Please sponsor us. We love you at themodrock.com.
Can you imagine that email? We wouldn't be able to decipher it, maybe.
Or
Maybe they should be on your wish list
Oh,
for a guest.
yeah, that
Do
would
you
be
know,
really cool.
you'll be the first
Hybrid-
person I
hybrid.
email if that happens.
But if they want to make themselves more palatable, if they happen to be of like a skin type or a body type or some kind of composite therein that is not exactly like what we would consider natural, if you have the ability to shapeshift, just make yourself look like Jason Momoa, and you will be completely more palatable. And then like slowly introduce the fact like, hey, we don't normally look like this. We just wanted to present a more like palatable demeanor before we proceeded.
This is brilliant. And just incidentally, I'm really sorry, Jason, because this might ruin your career. I don't know. But yes, this is brilliant.
Oh
Yeah.
God.
Jason definitely needs to come on now. As an alien
Yeah.
or not, doesn't matter.
Hey, we will take it.
Yeah.
But more than
It's
anything, sorry, go ahead, Emily.
I was just gonna say, Josh said in the chat, Scarlett Johansson would be another okay form to take.
Oh no. Oh, good grief.
What were you saying,
Oh,
Trey? Sorry.
oh, I don't know. So let me just proceed forward with this. Kim, I just have to say this was such a fun episode. I really enjoyed it, and please don't think this forward, but would you like to be on the podcast at a future date?
Oh, sure. I have other stories.
I love how you did that. You're like, will you go to prom with me?
Will you go to podcast with me?
I'd be honored, Trey. Thank
We should
you
have
for
like a podcast pod pro. I can't say the word. I'm
Podproposal?
proposal.
proposal.
Podposal.
Podproposal. Yeah.
Oh God. Emily, the next time that we're in person together, to do the proposal thing, we should do like the prom pose, but just be
Right. We should go to J.C. Penney and do one of those photo shoots.
Oh,
With
that
them
would
and
be
be like-
awesome. That needs to be your podcast photo.
We should do that for a photo shoot for the podcast. We'll put that on the website and be like, this is us.
I'm crying, and I'm not sure if it's because of my allergies or how hard I'm laughing.
Someone just screenshot. Why can't I do that with my hands? There, okay.
Oh God. Okay.
So
but
funny.
Kim, I have not had this much fun in a while.
This is great.
This is so much fun. From Renaissance to starting your own magazine to having a UFO crop circle in your backyard and seeing a lot of UFOs. I think there is a through line throughout all of this, and I think that you have manifested a lot of the success in your life by thinking positively and looking forward versus looking back. And I think that is such an incredible message to share with everybody, including your 82-year-old neighbor. So I
Herb.
want to say, Herb. So
Herb.
I want to say thank you so much for being here, and
Thank
I
you.
have one last request. If you were to give an inspiring words to anyone who's looking to get started, whether it be in Renaissance or researching into the potentially unknown history of William Shakespeare, question mark if that's his real name, or
Right.
into anything related therein, what words of wisdom would you give them?
Well, you can get anything now on the internet in terms of information. So I guess the key is for me, what really inspires me is to find those areas of history that still hold, that there's so many parts of history that have not yet been fully explained, that are still mysterious. And there's so much room right now for still exploring what happened to various people, who they were, etc. Even Christopher Marlowe, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare and Ben Jonson.
Mm-hmm.
And he died in this very freak accident at a tavern brawl with his buds. And no one can figure out, like, did he just die this random death, this incredible playwright genius, at the age of like 28 or something? Or was he a spy for Queen Elizabeth and was taken out because of that reason? And so there's like, no one quite knows. Like, so there's so much out there that is still unknown. And so I would say for anyone, find those things that inspire you, that get you excited, get that passion and juice running, like, oh my God, You got to learn more, because how can you not? This is just so fascinating. There's going to be a topic out there that's going to turn you on like that. So just do a little bit of digging, and you'll find those. And they're everywhere in history. You just have to look for them.
Awesome advice. And
Yes.
as Archer 33X said, the truth is out there.
I love that. As we close out our episode here tonight, want to say that this episode, along with probably every other podcast episode from here on out, is always going to be dedicated in memory to Joe Capone, our moderator, fellow comedian, critic, encourager, and fantastic friend. Find us pretty much wherever you tune into podcasts. Please help us reach our subscriber goal. You can do that by looking for updates, announcements, and more on our social media under Modern Romantic. Thank you, everybody. Have a weird day, specifically a crop circle weird day.
Sounds perfect.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks,
you,
everybody.
guys.
We
Thanks,
love
everybody.
you.
Bye.